Merging mosque and state. Canada really ought to keep them separated. Plus, Paul Joseph Watson joins us to talk Twitter's new censorship policy. I'm Faith Goldie, and you're watching On the Hike.
Hey, whatever happened to the separation between religion and state? Last time I checked, we live in a liberal democracy, and while it's not written in Canadian law, what is guaranteed is a freedom of religion, which includes freedom from religion. And well, we're not alone. The separation of religion and state is a staple value in any liberal society. To quote Robert Audi, in liberal democracies, individuals share political power as equals. Liberal democratic states, then, must try to govern on the basis of non-controversial principles and must avoid governing on the basis of contentious, moral, and religious ideas. Religious principles are notoriously controversial among liberal democratic citizens. Consequently, it is widely thought that a liberal democratic government must not employ controversial religious reasons when deciding policy. Okay, I'll admit, so it's not that simple. Technically, the Queen remains our head of state, and she is technically the supreme governor of the Church of England. So while we're no Saudi Arabia or Pakistan when it comes to the intermingling of religion and state, we are sort of a Christian nation. But say that as a politician, and folks will call for your crucifixion. And yet, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is merging mosque and state. See, this week, the Rebel.media learned that Canadian men and women in uniform will be moved from their usual barracks in several military bases across Ontario and Quebec to make room for over 6,000 Muslim migrants. Now, to be entirely frank, there are salient arguments on both sides as to whether or not this is wise public policy. However, what gets me isn't so much the shelter accommodations as it is the religious accommodations. Both the Ontario and Quebec military camp to migrant camp budgets deal with, quote, religious support for the new migrants. And here's where just about everyone should be scratching their heads. As our government, you're charged with handling a great deal of our cash. And a lot of us are cool with spending some of that money to help persecuted people flee what is objectively a shite situation. And while a great deal of those people will admit things are happening, yeah, sure, a little too fast, but they're okay with the idea of their money being spent on things like housing for these people, feeding these people, even if it is extra to accommodate their halal diet. People have got to eat something and sleep somewhere, like we get that. But the government, who is using our money to fly these people over, arrange for their travel to the bases, even orchestrate Arabic translators and a halal kitchen, now plans to use more of your money to purchase these newcomers Qurans, prayer mats, and even build them mosques on our military bases. Just think about that for a second. I mean, people in this country get worked up about our tax-exempt churches. Imagine now if the government started building churches on your dollar, on public property no less. Not to mention the fact that Islam, well, it's a pretty diverse religion. Is our state sanctioning one type of Islam over others? Or what kind of mosque will this be? Who will be running it? Further still, how can we be certain that sermons are consistent with Canadian values? Okay, but getting back to the point here for a second. Folks in this country, well, they get antsy when the mere name of God is mentioned in council meetings. Can you imagine now if your city voted to supply thousands of Bibles to different groups of Christians every 6 months? I mean, there have been crazy campaigns to remove crucifixes from historical government buildings. What if instead of prayer mats for Muslims, our government passed a motion to provide a cross, a nice little necklace maybe, or a little bracelet for every Christian newcomer to this country? I mean, we're set to spend $53,000 for washcloths and wipes for Muslim feet washing at one base alone, this one base alone. Imagine being told now that you and I were on the hook for some other denomination's holy pedicure. People would take to the streets. Media would be up in arms, and our government they'd be held to account, immediately reversing their insane suggestion. Instead, though, it's like nothing is happening at all, which is sort of concerning, especially in light of the fact that mosque and state, well, they're merging in other pockets of our country too. Look no further than Quebec's proposed Bill 59, which will give offended individuals the power to have writers they perceive to have criticized Islam censored and punished by onerous fines, and their name added to a list of offenders in perpetuity. Kind of sounds like blasphemy laws. Now, between taxpayer-funded prayer mats and Qurans and washcloths to the threat of censorship for those who merely criticize Islam, Canada is looking less and less like a country that separates its religion from its politics, and more like a nation prepared to grant special rights to Islam. Stay with us, Paul Joseph Watson. He's on the other side of this break.
I love Alberta. I've lived here my whole life and I'm proud of it. I'm proud of our free market, pro-business, low-tax, do-it-yourself attitude. And now, I'm watching my province get destroyed. We've all had hints of the NDP's radical views in the past, but no one actually thought they'd ever run this province. Not even them. And now they are. And the worst is yet to come. I give my sad forecast for Alberta in my new ebook, The Destroyers, Rachel Notley and the NDP's War on Alberta.
Welcome back. Who knew Twitter's unpersoning of right-wing individuals was just the tip of their inter-party plan? Twitter is now taking steps to make their platform more, quote, inclusive and diverse, because, folks, that's what the internet's really about. Let's take a look at the bullet points. Twitter is announcing the creation of a new Trust and Safety Council, which will be made up of more than 40 organizations, while members include folks like the Anti-Defamation League and Feminine Frequency. Journalist with Infowars.com, Paul Joseph Watson, is on the hunt to break it down for us. Thanks for being here, Paul.
Thanks, Faith. Good to be here.
All right. So Twitter's announced just recently that it suspended some 125,000 accounts, most linked to the Islamic State. This new council has the word safety in it. And yet when I'm looking at the 40 organizations, it doesn't look like they're consulting too many counter-terrorist groups. What is this council really about?
Well, they announced this council under the guise of the founder, the co-founder Jack Dorsey said, freedom of expression starts with safety, which sounds like a line out of Orwell's 1984. But they promised that this would represent a diversity of voices to basically police content on Twitter and prevent harassment. The problem with that is that not one single conservative group appears on that list, not one true advocate of free speech. Who does appear on that list, as you mentioned, is Feminist Frequency, who, of course, is our old friend Anita Sarkeesian. Now, she got up in front of the UN a couple of months ago now and said she defined harassment as people who say, you're a liar to a social justice warrior, or people who say, you suck to a feminist. She defines that, she characterizes that as harassment, and now she's on this council that will decide what constitutes harassment on Twitter. In addition to her, you've got groups like GLAAD, which is called for banning people who don't embrace homosexual rights. You've got the Dangerous Speech Project, which is basically a George Soros front. So you've got all these radical left-wing groups, supposedly in the name of diversity, they're going to police content on Twitter. In the aftermath of Twitter banning and suspending conservatives for months for having the wrong politics, so you can understand why people are concerned about this.
You brought up Jack Dorsey's tweet, and I'm wondering if you could comment on this difference between free speech and safe speech. Are we growing more and more in the public sphere towards the realm of essentially censoring opinions that we don't like?
Well, freedom of expression doesn't start with safety. It starts and ends with freedom of expression. There's no I support free speech, but you either allow all of it or allow none of it. And again, they're introducing this under the rubric of preventing harassment. Look, if somebody calls you fat for being a feminist, or if somebody criticizes you for having a certain political belief, deal with it. Stand up to them. Have a debate. That's what free speech is all about. It shouldn't be about creating a safe space for feminists and social justice warriors on Twitter so they can't be challenged and they can continue to engage in their own echo chamber. And this is dangerous. You know, people say, oh, Twitter's a private company. It can censor who it likes. Who cares, right? And while that's true, the problem is the collusion between social media and governments now, right? So social media is being used by governments to punish people for free speech. I'll give you an example. There was a Dutch guy a couple of weeks ago, in fact, several in a town in the Netherlands. One individual got on Twitter, criticized his country's refugee policy, said it was, quote, a bad plan. Those were the words he used, a bad plan. He later got a home visit from the police who warned him as to his future conduct. We've got Facebook in Germany working with the German government and ex-members of the Stasi to track down people, hit them with fines and even jail sentences for making anti-migrant comments. We've got thousands of people arrested in the UK every single year for making tweets, including anti-Muslim sentiment. So when the standards are being set online, they're being mirrored in the real world. So if we allow organizations like Twitter to broaden the definition of, quote, harassment and hate speech so that it becomes, you know, for example, criticism of the religion of Islam, and people are being harassed by police, by the government, being arrested for tweets, then it becomes a bigger problem than just the argument, oh, you know, Twitter's a private company, it can censor who it likes. This is a far bigger argument than that.
And in the case you just mentioned, it's a codification of Sharia. You know, you mentioned the fact you can engage with these people on Twitter, or you can block them, delete your account, get off altogether. That's the beauty of a free country and a free platform. I've had people say that I should essentially have been retroactively aborted. Guess what? Block, delete, ignore. I don't need Twitter to come in and essentially treat me like child. We also know that there's Saudi influence here as well. What is your prediction for the future of Twitter? We know that their stocks are crashing. They seem to have really hit a glass ceiling of 320 million users, I believe. What does the future look like for the organization?
Well, if they follow the example of companies like Mattel, who made a fat feminist Barbie with blue hair just so they could cave into social justice warriors, which created a marketing nightmare because nobody wants to buy it, then that's the direction that Twitter's heading. They've lost half their value in the last 3 months. For the first time ever, they've lost active users in Q4, down from 305 million to 303 million. So they're going to go the way of, you know, Dig, which started censoring content way back when that was popular. Reddit lost a ton of users for censoring content. Groups like MySpace, they create policies that are completely antithetical to their users. They go into complete irrelevance, and that's where Twitter's heading if it continues with this censorship, because social media is all about a free and open, vigorous debate. If they make it into a huge safe space for feminists, Islamists, and social justice warriors, and, you know, make it antagonistic to anybody else with a differing opinion, which is what they're doing by banning, suspending conservatives now, then they're going to shrink. They're already shrinking, and they're going to become irrelevant. And everybody on Twitter who is a conservative with a huge audience is going to go elsewhere. So it's not going to work out well for them.
Well, I hope that folks in Silicon Valley and elsewhere are listening and realize that there is a demand for a truly free platform for folks like yourself who don't want to lose their audiences, that tune in to hear their sometimes dangerous free speech. And I hope that they do create a truly free platform in the wake of what Twitter is doing in their censorship policy. Meantime, where can folks find you?
People can find me on Twitter until I get banned, obviously, at Prison Planet and Infowars.com.
All right. It's so good to have you, Paul. Thanks so very much. All right,
okay,
folks, don't touch that keyboard. When we return, your week's top headlines. That's next.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know the Rebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to therebel.media/store to find out more.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Welcome back. Time now for the top headlines we're tracking for you this week. In international news, Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church will meet in Cuba this Friday for what promises to be an historic event in ecumenical relations. No pontiff has ever met a reigning Russian Orthodox Patriarch since the Great Schism in 1054, while a joint statement between the two church leaders is expected to be signed of this week's meeting. And in Germany now, where police have searched two homes used to house refugees in a rural village. But among the opponents of the Assad regime living there, they tracked down a suspected commander of the Islamic State terror group. According to reports, the man is identified as Bassam, a notorious commander said to be responsible for the death of dozens. Meantime, a senior German educator has called for all pupils in that country to be forced to study Arabic until they graduate in the interest of the multicultural state. And in the U.S. now, where party outsiders Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders won their respective primaries in New Hampshire. And barely 12 hours after his win, Sanders was seen dining with notorious race baiter Al Sharpton, a man who has nearly $5 million in current state and federal tax liens against him and his businesses, which begs the question, when a man who wants to raise taxes dines with one who doesn't pay them, exactly who took care of the bill? And close now, where Liberal Party, which once criticized the Tories for whipping out their CF-18s, is holding firm to their promise to pull out. In a press conference that can only be described as an epic fail, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said our bombing missions will end by February 22nd, while we look to triple our size of training troops and commit $1 billion in aid for refugees. And finally, fat shamers have their sights on your pocketbooks. The Dietitians of Canada are calling for a tax of up to, wait for it, 20% to be placed on pop, chocolate milk, and other sugar-sweetened beverages that are contributing to the country's so-called obesity problem. Nanny State outlawing fun, folks. All right, stay with us. A quick comment on that very vocal minority gun-grabbing, politically motivated officers. That's on the other side of this break.
So open-minded that the brains have fallen out.
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled.
We've heard you loud and clear. You can't get enough Canadian conservative news and opinion. Why not check out our blog? It's all your favorite conservative bloggers together on a page called The Megaphone. Go to therebel.media/themegaphone or click on the Megaphone menu from our main page to check it out.
All right, folks, before we let you go, a quote of dishonor for you this week. This one comes from an op-ed penned by none other than former OPP commish Chris Lewis. Canada, he writes, has fairly strict gun control legislation, But it was even better when we actually had a long gun registry. Too bad for you, Mr. Lewis, that is not the case, and there is not a single shred of evidence to suggest Canada's long gun registry prevented even one single crime. However, your piece, which suggested only officers, security professionals, and the military should have a right to handguns, that did make for a good chuckle. And for that, I thank you, sir. All right, quick pivot. A note for fellow believers. Folks, as we head into this solemn Lenten fast, I pray God blesses you in your prayer, your fasting, and your almsgiving during these next 6 weeks, and makes you a blessing too. I always find that high holy times are ones of trials and tribulations. Where angels go, trouble follows, as they say. And so, I pray for your protection and your guidance too. Until next week, God bless, and remember, we got your 6.